Well, Montgomery County renters are up in arms over sky-high rents and evictions they say are forcing some residents out, and that includes vulnerable seniors. Here to talk about what's going on in the county is Matt Lozaki with the Montgomery County Renters Alliance. Matt, good to talk with you today. And this is a big problem. Tell us specifically what the issues are for renters in Montgomery County.
It's not just Montgomery County, it's regionally. Everybody is seeing their rents go up well beyond what they can afford. We're seeing working families, seniors, veterans, people who are struggling to make ends meet, as well as wealthier residents getting priced out of their homes because in Maryland there's no rent stabilization of any kind. There's no just cause eviction, which prevents a landlord from not renewing a lease each year without a good reason. There are code issues that our renters are afraid to speak about because they're afraid of either having their rents go up through the roof as a penalty or retaliatory action, or because they're afraid their lease won't be renewed. So we're seeing renters insecure, concerned about their homes, many of them long-term residents who want to stay secure, stay stable, and they are afraid.
Yeah, and you say this is going on everywhere. Do you see it happening more in certain areas than others? For example, worse in Chevy Chase, worse in Tacoma Park, worse in Silver Spring. Where?
Well, I think that anyone would say that people who are suffering economically, new immigrants to the county, senior citizens, the disabled, people with mental illness, people who struggle to take on these kinds of challenges in the first place are going to be suffering worse, and that's for sure. But the irony is we've seen this happening for wealthier communities as well as in the economically challenged communities. I've dealt in just the last couple of months with two renters who are upper middle class, who were forced out of their home because they demanded that the building manager maintain the building the way they're supposed to according to code. They were then asked to leave, labeled a problem tenant, and then told that their lease would not be renewed. We took them to the authorities and were able to reverse that. But if it happens over for people making paying $3,000 to $5,000 a month in rent, imagine what it's like for somebody on the margins paying $500 to $1,000 in rent without the resources to fight.
So in Maryland, then there's nothing on the lease that you signed that says next year's rent cannot go up more than, say, 5%.
Except for Tacoma Park, which is blessed with a rent stabilization law, nowhere in Maryland is there any kind of rent stabilization. We've seen rents go up 5, 10, 20, and in a recent terrible case at Hampshire Towers, the rents were up 25 to 72% on renters there, forcing families with children in the local schools, new immigrants, senior citizens, veterans to be forced out of their homes. That was negotiated down to 15%, but it was so outrageous, and they brought it to 15%, which is moderately outrageous.
Yeah, it is moderately outrageous, but 72% is almost a doubling of your rent. I mean, how could people foresee that they would be able to afford that?
If you're on Social Security, you're not seeing that kind of rent increase. If you're a working person working for the federal government, you're not seeing your income grow by 3 or 5 or 10%. And yet, because of such a high demand to live in Montgomery County and in this region in general, D.C. and in Northern Virginia, landlords are increasing the rent as much as the market will bear. We don't believe that housing should be at the same standard as any common commodity. It's not beer and cigarettes, it's not sneakers, it's somebody's home. So we think that there should be a balance between a landlord's reasonable interest in making a return on their investment and a person's desire and right to live stably in their home.
Now, you mentioned Tacoma Park as the only area in Montgomery County or all of Maryland that has the rent control?
All of Maryland.
All of Maryland. Okay. What are the arguments then for, or I guess I should say, against rent control?
Well, the landlords have said, and stated this in Annapolis and other places where I've heard them testify, that it's their property and they should be able to do whatever they want. And so that goes back to it's a regular old commodity, and if the market will allow me to charge $1 million, then I'll charge $1 million. We don't think that's the right approach to responsible property management in housing. And we might see, if it were beer and cigarettes, you can get what you want, but housing is special.
And if you own a place and you want to put whatever price on it, probably, I guess, you should be allowed to do that. But what about the notice? I mean, shouldn't you have to give these people that are in these apartments plenty of notice?
Only have to give them 60 days.
60 days.
So you have 2 months. If, say, you moved into your apartment, which is now your home, and you moved in when you were 65 years old. Now you're 78 years old. You sold the family house so that you could have a nest egg to pay your rent based on the interest that you make. And now you've got your entire life and your household goods and your social life, your doctors, your children, your grandchildren living in this neighborhood. And now you get told your rent's going up 10%. And now you're going for what would be considered a normal expense in housing, which is about 30% of your income going to housing. Now it's in 40%, then 50%, and for some seniors, we're seeing 60 or 70%, crowding out their ability to pay for medications, crowding out their ability to pay for food, entertainment, or any other cost of living. So we're seeing that happen. But, you know, rent stabilization and that kind of affordability is only part of the picture. We're also seeing code enforcement violations, not just in Montgomery County, but throughout the state of Maryland, that go unenforced. Hampshire Towers, which I mentioned earlier, had upwards of 500 code violations when this debacle happened of raising rents so that the landlord could pay for the code violations that didn't get remedied in the past. So they went on for years, and we did not see any enforcement. So code violations are a problem. We're also seeing retaliation from landlords that become very difficult to enforce. For anybody to come back and say you're not allowed to do that. So we don't see any kind of protection for renters, yet 36% of Maryland now lives in rental housing, up from 25% in 2008. So the population is moving into rental housing, but the protections that ought to go with it are non-existent.
Are people moving more into rental housing because the prices to buy are just so high?
It's part of the reason, but there's also, if you want to live in an urban area, and Silver Spring and Bethesda and Rockville are now small cities, and you want to be near transportation, publicly invested in transportation, services, entertainment, you know, you have to, if you want to buy a house in downtown Silver Spring, it's going to be over $500,000. So apartment living becomes your main choice. So economically, that's one reason. Another reason is that it's a way of life. Seniors don't want to have giant houses anymore where the kids are gone and it's empty, so they move into apartment living because it's more convenient. You want to be near public transportation so you can be near work. So there's lots of other reasons now that the entire country is now moving closer into rental housing, not just because they can't afford to buy a home.
Yeah, and then they don't want to move out of the area that they know and love, or
That's
especially
right.
if their kids and their grandchildren are nearby, they don't want to move away from their family.
That's right.
So it becomes an impossible task of trying to find housing that they can afford.
That's right.
You've probably heard some heart-wrenching stories from some of the renters. Can you share a story with us?
We had one renter, 37 years, government employee, retired, lived in the same building for upwards of 40 years, became a tenant activist trying to organize other tenants, senior citizen, disabled, living in her home in this rental complex. They complained about the fire doors not opening. There was some construction and required everybody to go through the fire doors. She couldn't open the fire doors correctly because they were too difficult. They complained to the landlord. Landlord refused to fix the fire doors, something very simple. Finally, another tenant called the fire department and had the fire marshal come check it. They said these doors do not open easy enough for residents to get out. It's a safety hazard, and it's not right. Landlord immediately came, fixed the fire doors. They called this person down, said, you know, see if it works for you. She opens the door, she says it's fine, goes back to her apartment. Fire marshal leaves. Then they called her and said, come to the office, we'd like to talk to you.
No.
And they said, you know what, that annual lease that we've been giving you for the last 4 decades, we're going to put you on a month-to-month lease. That means with just 60 days notice, any month along the way, we can tell you you're going to be out of your home, the home that you've been in most of your life. So this kind of pressure, it's a chilling effect on renters. Renters hear these stories. They're afraid to speak up. They see the quality of their housing decline. They're afraid to organize. They're afraid to seek government remedy because there's so much influence by landlords and developers on our politics that they are afraid to go there because they're afraid they'll be exposed to the landlord.
Quickly, any legislation that's on the books or looks like it's heading toward Annapolis where it could maybe remedy the situation?
We have some champions around. One of them is Mark Elrich, a county council member who has put forward Bill 1915 calling for some very fundamental changes. And I'm glad to say that Nancy Navarro, Tom Hucker, even Craig Rice and Hans Riemer have all said they'd support this legislation. Will allow for 2-year leases to be offered each year. It'll allow for code inspections to be increased. It'll end month-to-month lease fees. Now they say your rent will go up 3% if you sign an annual lease, but if you go month-to-month, it could be 20, 40, 60%, forcing people to take on leases they can't afford. It'll increase the kind of reporting that landlords have to provide to the county so the county can make good policy decisions. It'll increase the opportunity of renters to know what their rights and responsibilities are. So it's a broad bill, but each one of the things that it calls for is very fundamental. It's a good first step, doesn't solve everything, but we're very proud of it, and we hope it passes.
And that's coming up in the next legislative session.
Yes, it is, in Montgomery County.
Great. Good to talk to you. Matt Lozak is with the Montgomery County Renters Alliance.
Thank you, Melanie.
Important topic today. Thank you. We're coming back. We have more News Talk right after this.